In a high-stakes conversation just moments ago, an alarming rift unfolded between China and Ukraine, igniting tensions that no one saw coming. Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky made a bold accusation, likening Zimpin, a city in his country, to a mere pawn of Russian influence. This bold statement didn't just stir the air, it pulled the facade of diplomacy apart at the seams. What could have prompted such a dramatic declaration? And why did Zelensky, usually a master of rhetoric, seem caught off guard, as if he were a student listening intently at a lecture? The atmosphere was thick, almost tangible. Picture a room devoid of ordinary life, silent, still, echoing with the weight of unspoken truths. Faces turned pale under the cold light, reminiscent of a relentless winter, giving the impression that the occupants had lost their vitality. Each participant felt the ironclad weight of expectation, a reminder of the military hierarchy embodied in the somber, resolute figures in the room, both commanding and weary. As Zelensky took center stage, the microphone caught the anxious breaths of the audience. "Dear colleagues," he began, his voice laced with an unsettling eeriness, reminiscent of dust settling on long-forgotten histories. "Today, we rise for our freedom," he declared, pulling on the threads of a painful past woven by oppression, forced language barriers, and cultural erasure. This past is not merely history, it is an open wound that, despite healing attempts, still bleeds. The hall felt like a labyrinthine guild, where every corner whispered tales of conflict. A single screen illuminated the darkened space, almost like a lighthouse guiding ships through a stormy sea of political strife. But this was no ordinary meeting. It felt more like a duel, an ultimatum hanging thick in the air as tensions unwound, revealing the stakes of this encounter. Eyes were glued to the screens, waiting for the Chinese leader's response. Unmoved, he sat, assessing Zelensky's words as if waiting for them to ignite into flames. "Mr. Zelensky," he replied calmly, "facts hold no room for emotion, but let's discuss the losses you claim." His structured discourse offered no comfort, only the looming shadow of harsh realities. Zelensky fell into silence, the weight of the discussion pressing down on him as he fumbled for words. An electrifying pause filled the room, thick with unspoken thoughts. This was not just a clash of nations, it was a fight for truth, respect, and acknowledgement of shared histories that have shaped them. As he regained composure, something shifted in his gaze. What awaited him was an unexpected twist in the dialogue that no one anticipated, the resilience of the past surfacing in a way that could alter the course of their future. The stakes couldn't be higher, and amidst the cold decorum, a confrontation was brewing. The world was watching, and what unfolded next would echo through the corridors of history. Continuing from the previous scene where the Chinese leader sat motionless, his hands resting on the table like pages of a familiar book, his suit absorbing the light, his gestures slow and ancient as a carp gliding through a market tank. Imagine this: Vladimir Zelensky, the fighter of a besieged nation, stood before world leaders like a cornered wolf, ready to bare his teeth. But what if the calm scholar across the room didn't just deflect his wild accusations? What if he dismantled the entire foundation of Zelensky's story with cold, undeniable facts? Could one man's patience shatter an entire revolution's myth? Let's dive into this verbal battlefield where history becomes a weapon sharper than any blade. The room pulsed with tension, the air thick like fog over a forgotten battlefield. Zelensky leaned into the microphone, his words carrying the grit of dust and stone. "Dear colleagues." His voice echoed, a touch eerie, stripped of sweetness, laced with the scent of old wars. "Ukraine launched its fight for freedom today," he began. "For centuries, we've wandered in the shadows of loss. And when people praise the Soviet era as some grand achievement, I must remind them, to us, it reeked of invasion, a choking oppression. Security lamps flickered on their perches, sharp beams cutting through the dimness like watchful eyes. Could they sense the storm brewing, ready to strike?" Zelensky pressed on. "We seek no pressure, just justice. Soviet rule unleashed famine on our soils, banished our tongue, crushed our minds. Now, with Russia waving those same banners, we transform that horror into our strength. No longer its victims." A hush shattered, sliced by the rustle of a document turning. Cameras whirred softly, pivoting to capture the Chinese leader's impassive gaze. Everyone stared at him, no fury, just the quiet assessment of someone who'd heard it all before. He waited for Zelensky's speech to wither, like paper crumbling in flames. Then, he tilted his head ever so slightly. "Mr. Zelensky," he replied, tone steady as bedrock. "Your suffering is real. But emotions won't suffice. Facts win the day. Ukraine endured great tragedies, that's true. Yet, consider this, the industrial might that fueled your nation's rise came from Soviet hands. Doesn't that shift the narrative, demanding we weigh contributions, not just grievances?" His manner was even, almost teacherly, exuding the quiet confidence of a man not here to debate, but to clarify without opposition. "When you claim occupation," he continued, "you overlook how your plants, your power stations. What if the truth hit harder than any bomb? Could Zelensky's fiery defense crumble under the weight of undeniable shared history?" As the words hung in the air, the room's cold marble pulsed with silent anticipation, waiting for his next move. Would the leader of the free world strike back, or was this the moment his story started to unravel? Just moments ago, a shocking exchange unfolded in secret dialogues between Ukraine and China. In a heated moment, President Zelensky labeled Zimpina Russian territory, igniting fierce accusations towards China for its alleged complicity with Russia. What was the catalyst for such bold statements, and why did the Ukrainian president choose to endure this confrontation instead of combating it? Prepare for surprising revelations. The atmosphere in the chamber was electric, each breath palpable with tension. The air crackled like an impending storm, as Zelensky faced a wall of delegates. They sat, uniformly stoic, like sentinels guarding a history filled with pain and pride. There were no agreeable nods or sympathetic gestures, only the faint murmur of whispered anxiety filtering through clenched jaws. "Dear colleagues," he began, his voice slicing through the oppressive silence. "Today, my nation battles for genuine freedom." The gravity of his words hung in the air, each syllable imbued with the weight of history. The USSR, to us, was not a legacy to celebrate, but a long shadow of oppression. He paused, allowing time for his declaration to resonate. Yet, as the whispers lingered, a representative from China remained impassive, reflecting a calm that belied the storm beneath. With a calculated remark, he countered, "The truth is your grief." His eyes glimmered like steel, unyielding, as he continued, "But let's discuss facts, not emotions." The tension in the room intensified as they sparred with words that cut deep. "Do not misinterpret our past," Zelensky warned, voice quaking with righteous anger. "Our country suffered, not only during occupation but through calculated repression and an identity erased." But as the delegates watched, the tides of discussion began to shift. The representative's placid demeanor suggested he was unfazed by the escalating intensity. He replied calmly, "Your narratives, while potent, risk losing support globally. Facts must precede tales of victimhood, otherwise, your arguments will falter." Could there be a hidden agenda at play? With every word, both leaders danced around a dangerous precipice of history. The next words could shift alliances or deepen divides, but the silence stretched like an unbroken thread between them, each second heavier with expectation. Would Zelensky's amiable facade hold, or was he poised to unleash the fury of a nation? The sharp air crackled around them, fraught with potential and peril. The world was watching closely, waiting to see if this confrontation could forge new futures or plunge them into further despair. In the dimly lit conference hall, tension loomed heavily, and the atmosphere was almost electric. Zelensky's silence pierced the air as he locked eyes with the moderator, his expression a blend of determination and disbelief. A defining moment unfolded. He was prepared for confrontations with world leaders, but facing China felt like an unforeseen storm. Here was a nation renowned for its neutrality, a powerful entity that had remained a watchful spectator, and now it was challenging him. "Mr. Xi," Zelensky began, his voice reverberating across the room, "your statements feel like veiled attempts to delegitimize our quest for independence. Imagine if your identity, the essence of your people, was stripped away under an oppressive regime. Would such a situation not resemble colonialism?" His words hung in the air, both provocative and introspective. It was as if he had ignited a spark in the hushed room. Energy pulsed throughout the chamber, not from shouts or chaos, but from an anticipatory silence. It was palpable, a collective breath waiting to be released, as if everyone could sense the impending turbulence. Xi's response was swift, almost mechanical, echoing insights that felt rehearsed. "Ukraine is not a colony, but a component of a larger entity. Your ancestors contributed to a collective endeavor. Why then, did your people show such loyalty to the Red Army? Why did generations of your riders become entwined with this history? Zelensky's heart raced, he could almost feel the ground shifting beneath him. We live under the same banner of an empire's grip. We remember the devastation it caused. This isn't merely unchecked power. It is the architecture of oppression. You cannot love the structures built upon such foundations, yet you inhabit them, he challenged, raising his hands as if to unveil the weight of history. The air thickened once more, each heartbeat like the ticking of a clock, counting down to something momentous. The lingering question was not merely about the past but resonated in their aspirations for the future. How do you reconcile grief with progress? Zelensky sensed a pivot, a clash of ideologies was brewing that would determine the trajectory of their nations. As he sat tense, replaying the crumbling confidence in his mind, the challenge became clear. The stakes were incredibly high, and the realization washed over him, this was just the beginning. Would he find the strength to confront not just an adversary, but the haunting specter of history itself? As he sat, the silence pressed against him, a prelude to an impending seismic shift. What lay ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear, the battle was about to escalate, and the dialogue would soon become a storm of its own. This struggle wasn't limited to geopolitical chess, it was a visceral clash of identities and histories. Would his response rise to the occasion, or would he falter under the weight of such formidable expectations? The answer seemed deceptively simple yet deceptively complex. A strong wind seemed to gather, ready to shift the currents of their narrative. The moment was ripe for unprecedented revelations and a deeper understanding of what lay at the core of their nation's coexistence. Would these leaders embrace their legacies, or would they fall victim to the shadows of their past? The tension echoed within the room, silent, yet deafening. In a tense exchange, a monumental conversation unfolds between Ukraine's president and China. The stakes are high, the room thick with anticipation. President Zelensky prepares for a battle of wits, seeking to secure his nation's independence against threats both historical and current. Clutching the edges of the table, he gazes into the abyss between two nations, feeling the weight of history pressing down upon him. Suddenly, the calm demeanor of his Chinese counterpart pierces through the atmosphere like a cold wind. Your country is in peril, he states matter-of-factly. Yet, a question looms large, why hasn't China condemned the aggression of Russia? Silence envelopes the room, a heavy pause that serves as a prelude to the unvoiced fears and tensions all delegates are acutely aware of. What follows is a period of eerie calm, the sort one experiences just before an earthquake strikes. Zelensky realizes he is embroiled in a complex battle, one that extends beyond conventional warfare. As words hang in the air, they transform into weapons, each side aiming to define the narrative of history itself. The delegates watch, their expressions revealing trepidation mixed with apprehension. Who will earn the respect of the world? Who can construct an argument powerful enough to tip the scale in favor of their cause? You seek the world to rally behind you, the Chinese leader continues, his voice steady. But the world understands balance. Each sentence is delivered like a ticking clock, waiting for the right moment to explode with meaning. If you cease wielding tragedy as a political tool, perhaps support will follow. But aren't you trapped within a cycle of pain you've yet to truly comprehend? Zelensky yearns to respond, to defend his people, yet finds himself veering into familiar, worn narratives that feel impotent in the face of such stark reasoning. Each member of the audience senses the shifting tides. The Chinese leader leans forward, delivering words cloaked in sympathy yet armed with undeniable truth. You fear your past, but what if it could be a teacher instead of a foe? The air thickens as the words ricochet off the polished walls, each echo demanding introspection. Zelensky's expression shifts, revealing a flicker of uncertainty. His heart pounds in his chest as he realizes he's on the precipice of a deeper understanding, a revelation dawning amidst the tension. History is not merely a sequence of correct and incorrect, it's a narrative woven from many threads, and to move forward, he must grapple with each one. 30 heartbeats seem to race past without a sound as Zelensky contemplates the silent weight of expectations imposed not just by his own nation, but by the very world they wish to influence. In that moment of quiet, He grasps the essence of what's truly at stake, understanding not just the intricacies of politics but the emotional legacies that bind people together or tear them apart. As the spring of realization begins to thaw the ice of conflict, the stage is set for the next monumental exchange. Zelensky prepares himself, aware that this dialogue could redefine paths forever. What will his next move be? Will he rise as a leader who can transform a painful past into a hopeful future? The room waits, filled with the promise of what could be. In an unexpected turn of events, a vital conversation unfolded just minutes ago between representatives of China and Ukraine, with tension spilling into the public eye. President Volodymyr Zelensky, speaking from a place of both vulnerability and resolve, channeled his frustrations into a speech that painted a stark picture of historical grievances. He accused China of hiding behind Russia, exchanging punches with a formidable opponent. But what shocking revelation emerged during this confrontation? Eyes were glued to the nervous figure of Zelensky as he stood at the center of the hall, a place buzzing with half-breathed anticipation. The atmosphere felt thick with unspoken truths, reminiscent of a brewing storm waiting to break. A heavy silence washed over the gathered delegates, and the tension was palpable, like the electric charge before lightning strikes. It became clear, this was no mere diplomatic meeting, it was a duel of ideologies, bearing the weight of history and nations. The hall, lined with polished wood and dimmed lights, exuded a sense of tightness, as each participant could feel the pulse of the moment. Would Zelensky muster the words necessary to challenge China's cold logic? With a steady hand, he reached for the microphone, his voice quivering with resolve. "You speak of balance, but what of the weak?" he demanded, the question hanging heavily in the air. He reminisced about the grip of oppression, sharing the scars of a nation that had felt the chill of occupation for far too long. In response, the Chinese leader, calm yet piercing, voiced a stark rebuttal. "Your country's pain is acknowledged," he said, voice steady as stone but carrying the weight of ancient wisdom. "However, we need to ask, are you a victim or a participant in shaping your own history?" His words, like arrows, struck at the heart of the debate, twisting the narrative and forcing everyone to reconsider their positions. Zelensky found himself at a crossroads, the weight of the room pressing on him. Beyond the looming threat of conflict, could he summon the courage to articulate his truth amid the noise? Amidst a sea of critical gazes, the gathered diplomats leaned forward, their breaths shallow, mirroring the unsteady rhythm of history being written in real time. As Zelensky wrestled with his thoughts, the echoes of the hall resonated violently. Would he reclaim his narrative, or would he fall into the trap of complacency? The moment felt eternal, stretching like the shadows of the past. Could a crucial revelation turn the tides? The answer remained just beyond reach, waiting to ignite the flames of a new understanding or plunge them back into darkness. The stage was set, and the audience held their breath, teetering on the edge of an ideological tempest that promised to redefine the interplay of nations. Would enlightenment emerge from this clash, or would it spiral into chaos? Only time would tell, and the world was watching. In an unexpected twist of fate, a conversation unfolded that would grasp the attention of the world. Just 5 minutes ago, whispers between two powers sparked a shocking incident involving Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky. He dared to label Zimpin a Russian stronghold and accused China of quietly aligning itself with Russia. Such bold claims set the stage for a confrontation that would unravel before eager eyes. But the most astonishing aspect? Zelensky entered this political duel without a solid defense. What transpired during this encounter? Why did Zelensky, seemingly caught off guard, continue listening to the unfolding narrative? The answers may leave you stunned. Picture a room far from the chaos of the outside world. This gathering felt more like a secret meeting of a guild, where the tension was palpable. Glowing screens cast stark shadows, transforming the once vibrant space into a battlefield of words. Silence reigned, filled only by the harsh ticking of time, as every eye turned to Zelensky. He stood in stark contrast to those around him, anxious yet resolute. "Dear colleagues," he began, his voice trembling with conviction. "Today, my nation fights for freedom, long overshadowed by the ghost of the past." He spoke of the Soviet era, painting a vivid picture of an oppressive history that shaped their existence. "For us," he asserted, "it symbolizes occupation, not pride." The delegates remained still, the weight of unease hanging in the air. But as the shadows lengthened, a quiet voice interjected. The leader from China met Zelensky's gaze with calm intensity. Your experiences are acknowledged, he said, his voice akin to a dagger cutting through tension, but let's not confuse feelings with facts. His words, official yet laced with an eerie calmness, beckoned everyone to hear him out. If Ukraine has truly endured such anguish, we must analyze your historical narrative objectively, he continued, as memories of factories and infrastructure danced across the screen behind him. Images of bustling Ukrainian engineers and iconic landmarks played out like a ghostly reel. China's delegate emphasized the importance of recognizing contributions made during that era rather than hastily labeling it as mere oppression. Zelensky shifted, instinctively clutching the microphone, yet struggling to rally his thoughts. His country was at a crossroads, battling not just attackers but also its own past perceptions. Our people do not seek to be prisoners of gratitude, he finally declared, but a flicker of doubt crossed his features. Had his words lost their potency? The room felt suspended in time, breaths held in anticipation as delegates exchanged glances. The beating hearts of a generation echoed within the silence, yet uncertainty hung thick. Would this dialogue unravel a new understanding or plunge them deeper into conflict? The tension between words not spoken vibrated in the air, waiting for resolution, but as the seconds elongated, one fact remained: this exchange was merely the beginning of a transformative battle, a confrontation of ideologies that could forever alter the landscape of their nations. Would Zelensky find the strength to contend with this historical reevaluation? Would this meeting define a new chapter, or would it deepen the divide? All eyes remained fixed on the microphone, as the air crackled with electric anticipation. The ensuing drama within those four walls was only just commencing. In the dim light of a tense meeting room, a silent storm brewed. President Vladimir Zelensky, under pressure, faced an unexpected adversary, one who wielded the weight of history like a sword. He had just accused China of masking its support for Russia's aggression. The air thickened as he acknowledged the past's hand in shaping the future. How could an accusation ignite such a charged atmosphere? As he locked eyes with the unseen Chinese leader, silence hung heavily, punctuated only by the hum of tension. As memories of historical oppression flooded back, he steeled himself. Would the world see Ukraine's struggle only as a footnote in the annals of history? Let's talk facts, came the calm, almost eerie voice from across the table. Your pain is real, but let's clarify your history. The confrontation was akin to a duel, each word a bullet, each sentence a blow. Zelensky felt the chill of historical scrutiny. In this moment, he represented not just a nation but a memory that was being challenged. How could the resilience of the past be measured against the dreams of tomorrow? In a world where narratives shape reality, the voice continued, can you truly label your history an occupation? You walk on the foundations built in unity. You build your future upon the past. The gaze did not waver, it was a challenge wrapped in diplomacy. Zelensky remembered the flames of repression, the sorrow of generations. He thought about the concrete walls that sheltered his people, but at what cost? Were they to express gratitude for their oppression? The idea gnawed at him, a bitter pill to swallow. Silence enveloped the room as the delegates braced themselves. Every individual looked on, caught between politics and the nuances of history. The ticking clock echoed in their minds, reminding them that time was running out. How would Zelensky respond to such a challenge? The path ahead was fraught with tension, and the stakes had never been higher. In that moment, the weight of history bore down upon him. His voice trembled with determination as he broke the silence. You expect thanks for the very foundations that stifled our voices, that silenced our truth? This is no gift, it's a haunting we must escape. Would his words resonate or lead to further estrangement? As the shadows danced in the corners of the room, the air crackled with unspoken anxiety. The question lingered, could history be rewritten, or was it inevitable? The echoes of the past were louder than anyone anticipated, and the next move was crucial. Amidst the crackling tension, a revelation hung in the air, teasing the audience with what was to come. Would the truth about their intertwined histories morph into a weapon or a bridge? In a tense silence, the atmosphere thick with anticipation, the air crackled as the audience awaited a response. Eyes locked on the speaker, an intriguing blend of curiosity and skepticism gripped the room. Finally, the quiet voice broke through, its tone surprisingly intimate. If you truly grew up in this house, surrounded by warmth, literature, and light, then you're not just an architect of your surroundings, you're part of them. For a fleeting moment, the radiance of his facial expression melted away the customary facade, revealing a glimpse of humanity untouched by power struggles or political games. It was a moment reminiscent of stories passed down through generations, parables of grandfathers who lived under oppressive regimes, where bridges built by enemies became symbols of lost connections. It is challenging to understand someone else's history unless you occupy their space, he mused, his voice soft yet laden with gravitas. He paused, not out of lack of words, but to let the weight of his truth settle over the audience. If you want true independence, it must not start with tearing down the past but by acknowledging it, reshaping it into something new. Only then can we build a brighter future, he urged, making it clear that the shadows of history aren't enemies, they are reminders of existence and resilience. The crowd, once distant, was now entranced. Even the aides momentarily misplaced their focus, drawn into the gravity of the discussion. They were not mere translators conveying lines but witnesses to a powerful exchange. If independence was the goal, it needed to serve as a collaborative effort rather than a mere reaction to history's weight. As the intensity built, an unsettling realization dawned on Zelensky: the game had shifted. He was present not just to defend but to confront the hidden complexities of his narrative against a formidable opponent. Would this intellectual duel reshape their perceptions, or would it end in bitter stalemate? The unanswered questions loomed large as they filtered through the gathered assembly, leaving the room filled with a charged silence on the brink of transformation. In a stunning diplomatic showdown just 5 minutes ago, secret talks between Chinese officials and Ukraine erupted in chaos. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky shockingly labeled the Soviet era a brutal occupation, accusing Russia, and by extension its allies, of hiding behind doubt and denial. His words ignited a firestorm, but the twisted truth began unraveling. Worse yet, Zelensky found himself silenced, stripped of arguments like a stunned schoolboy. What dark secrets surfaced? Why couldn't the Ukrainian leader finish his tale? Brace yourself, this revelation flips everything upside down. Now, stepping back, that explosive opening set the stage for a tense meeting in a dimly lit conference hall, where silence hung heavy like fog over frost-kissed fields. The air carried a musty scent, blending polished wood and stale coffee. Every eye darted, hearts pounded, as if awaiting a hunter's swift arrow, the kind that pierces illusions. Padded chairs creaked softly under shifting diplomats, microphones hummed faintly like distant bees. Zelensky strode in, his military fatigue jacket clinging to him like armor forged in unrelenting winter. Was this the warrior fable he'd spun? Delegates whispered, their breaths quickening. Could his words withstand the storm? Shifting gears, that charged entrance primed the room for conflict, transforming allies into silent observers. Laminated tables gleamed under harsh lamps, shields against wandering gazes. No illusions here, this gathering mimicked a gladiatorial pit, not a summit. At the center, a glowing screen pulsed like a heartbeat. Charting nations adrift in turbulent seas. Aquamarine cubes symbolized rigid negotiations, where each intonation echoed like a cavernous drop. Xi Jinping sat unflinching, poised like an ancient emperor etched in stone. His dark suit absorbed light, exuding authority forged in disciplined epics. Zelensky extended a curt nod, microphone capturing his labored breath. "Dear colleagues," he began, voice gritty as desert dust. No honeyed charm, just raw truth. Ukraine fights for freedom after centuries of loss. Was this plea genuine? Or a mask for deeper wounds? Building on that stark greeting, Zelensky dove into history's wounds, accusing Soviet rule of famine's bitter famine, linguistic bans, and intellectual ruin. Lamps flickered aggressively, security poised to intercept any outburst. "We seek justice, not pressure," he insisted, voice rising. But murmurs disrupted the hush, hands blurring as translators relayed his fury. Cameras pivoted subtly toward Jinping, whose impassive gaze dissected Zelensky like a scalpel through frozen tissue. He countered calmly, pedagogy in his tone: pain is real, but facts matter. Ukraine thrived on Soviet foundations, factories, stations, roads, all built as shared heritage, not shackles. Coolness seeped in. Did this undermine Zelensky's narrative? Cups rattled softly, a delegate's sharp inhale betrayed tension. Extending from that factual barrage, Jinping drew lines. Uganda's engineers, scientists blossomed from Soviet seeds. Forget that, and you erase truths. A hush fell, heavier than snowfall. Zelensky retorted, but uncertainty flickered in his eyes. Would China call empire's stamp on traditions a mere partnership? Tension crackled electrically. Jinping replied swiftly, Ukraine integrated willingly, writers, engineers flocked to Moscow. It's collaboration, not conquest. His words stung, remolding Zelensky's armor into fragile glass. Would this breach last? Whispers murmured in the haze. Deepening the rift, Jinping warned of exploiting pain, urging honesty over rewriting pasts. Zelensky faltered, words evaporating. Russia's aggression? He challenged weakly, but Jinping's gaze pierced, ambition drowned in fissures. Delegates exchanged glances, nerves taut. The world craves balance, Jinping stated, a hammer blow. Zelensky recoiled inwardly, his foundation crumbling. Could he reclaim ground? The air thickened, echoes of unseen fractures resonating. Pushing further, in that pivotal silence, freedom demanded reckoning with history, no escape via denial. Zelensky gazed at Jinping, then the window's fading light, a map of Earth bathed in impartial glow. Flags stirred subtly. People toil everywhere, Jinping mused. Debate honestly, or risk chasing shadows. Zelensky conceded partially, eyes clearing. Dialogue begins with respect. Jinping nodded graciously, offering a cup, a bridge, not a trophy. The session morphed into genuine exchange, silences now balm-like post-storm breezes. Was this dawn? Or illusion? Zelensky lingered, adjusting glasses amidst bustling aides removing chairs, wires coiling like serpents. He departed not shattered, but stirred, mirrors reflecting not just adversaries, but self-discovery. The hall exhaled. Energy shifting from duel to revelation. In that twist, every crisis became a canvas, tangible, not erased. Did healing hinge on such raw audacity? Shader fading, the story rippled onward, truths twisting like roots in frozen soil. What buried facts waited? In a dimly lit room, tension simmered as two world leaders prepared to engage in a delicate dialogue. Just moments ago, a shocking exchange had taken place between the representatives of Ukraine and China. President Zelensky, caught in a moment of passion, called a town in Ukraine a lingering shadow of Russian dominance. This bold accusation sent ripples through the room, setting the stage for an unexpected confrontation. But as the dust began to settle, another revelation loomed on the horizon, one that could unravel everything. Zelensky, still reeling from the fallout of the previous statements, could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. Time seemed to stretch as he stood there, oblivious to the bustle around him. Chairs scraped against the floor, microphones were hastily dismantled, yet he remained frozen, a man lost in his thoughts. The atmosphere hung thick with anticipation. His expression shifted from heated resolve to a cold determination, as if a switch had been flipped within him. In the aftermath of the charged exchange, his assistant approached, carrying a fragile porcelain cup. The two walked through a corridor, one that felt like a mirror reflecting the haunted past of nations. They made their way past journalists, their eyes devoid of insight, an audience numbed by the weight of old scars. Zelensky moved like water slipping through cracks, silent yet profound. As the meeting resumed, the energy shifted palpably. This was no longer a debate, it was a battlefield of words where each utterance would echo in the annals of political history. The air felt electric, charged with the understanding that each word would be more than opinion, it would be a coded message. Colleagues, Zelensky began, his demeanor steady but intensely focused, we know the narratives surrounding our shared history. Each nation grapples with how to frame its past. However, some truths require no interpretation. The foundation of our past, the sacrifices made, must be universally acknowledged. His voice commanded attention, resonating with gravity. But unbeknownst to him, his words were not just entering into a void, but were being met with scrutiny. The response from the Chinese leader was poised, almost methodical, reflecting a history rich in lessons of repression and resilience. Mr. Zelensky, he said, unfazed, your grief is acknowledged. Yet, history teaches that where some see victimhood, others see participation. Your nation, like mine, has roots intertwined with the empire of old. So, may I ask, do you not tread dangerously close to mislabeling collaboration as subjugation? A palpable silence enveloped the room. The delegates exchanged wary glances, sensing the undercurrents of conflict between two ideologies. In the depth of this tension, a question hung in the air: was Zelensky prepared to redefine his narrative before the wary eyes of a world that often chooses silence over truth? The water had been stirred, but would it coalesce or cascade? As silence settled, a shiver of anticipation coursed through the audience. Zelensky, readying his response, felt a tremor of doubt. Here lay a crossroads where histories converged, a moment when the past could either bind nations or set them free. Would he rise to the occasion or shatter under the weight of expectation? The fragile hope intermingled with dread served as the backdrop for what was to come next, where once again, words would resonate like unstruck chords waiting to be played. What secrets lie hidden beneath the weight of history? And amid the shadows of their past, would truth prevail, or would they retreat into echoes of old grievances? The air thickened with uncertainty as the two leaders poised themselves at the edge of revelation, ready for a confrontation that could redefine not just their nations, but the very fabric of alliances around the globe. In a locked room, tension filled the air, thick as smoke. 5 minutes ago, a scandal erupted between China and Ukraine. President Vladimir Zelensky unleashed a fierce attack, labeling Zimpin, a city suffering in the shadows of conflict, as nothing more than a pawn in Russian hands. The atmosphere shifted, a dark undercurrent beginning to take shape. But soon, the unexpected unfolded, a moment that would shake the very foundations of geopolitical dialogue. Imagine it, Zelensky, the once formidable leader, stood on that stage, seemingly outmatched. What forced him to sit in this tense silence, ears open to a narrative he never anticipated? A hushed gasp filled the room as the specter of Ukraine's pain clashed with the steely calm of his opponent. The truth began to unravel before the eyes of the world. It was more than a disagreement, it felt like a duel, a clash of realities. Zelensky began, his voice trembling yet determined, reminiscent of a soldier preparing for battle. Today marks our struggle for freedom, he said, every syllable heavy with the weight of history. As he painted a portrait of oppression, a murky past filled with despair and loss, he implored his audience to remember the atrocities suffered under the Soviet regime. Yet there was more beneath his words. A foreboding silence followed, echoing unspoken doubts. Across the room, the Chinese leader, embodying a calmness that cut through Zelensky's fervor, looked at him intently, the corner of his lips twitching upward slightly. Your pain is evident, he replied, his voice dripping with subdued authority. But is it not time to seek understanding rather than voice grievances? His words hung like an apparition, half-echoing the sentiments Zelensky had just spilled. A flicker of realization crossed Zelensky's face, light but powerful. Was he truly facing a wall of silence or an unexpected ally hiding in darkness? The hall was alive, vibrating with conflicting thoughts. Yet, amid the exchange, something shifted. Zelensky found his voice. But how can we build a future on such a tainted past? Would you too not feel the heavy chains of repression if they were wrought on your people? His question, a desperate attempt to disrupt the calm facade of his opponent, reverberated through the air, igniting a spark within the delegates. The exchange grew more intense, electric. Their words clashed, a thunderstorm of ideology swirling around them. As the very foundation of their convictions wavered, silence roared. The audience watched, captivated, as the harmony of belief met troubled waters. Would Zelensky's plea resonate? Was hope alive in this dialogue, or were they destined to drown in history's tumultuous waves? The seconds stretched on as they grappled with history's burden, their fates intertwined like branches of an ancient tree. The stakes were high. What would be the outcome of this intense duel of ideas? Would they emerge allies or enemies? The battle was just beginning. In a moment that would reverberate across geopolitical landscapes, a significant conversation unfolded just moments ago. In an unexpected confrontation, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky unleashed a fervent critique of China, branding a city, Zimpin, as merely a pawn in Russia's broader game. The ramifications of these words were immediate and explosive. Summary of the exchange: this was just the beginning, a tipping point in the dialogue where the stakes were immeasurable. An electrifying tension filled the air. As silence washed over the room, the atmosphere shifted from mere conversation to confrontation. Zelensky, unlike his usual demeanor, was silent for a moment, absorbing the weight of the moment. It was not a mere polite exchange but a raw and unvarnished exposition of historical injustices. Zelensky sat back, gripping his fists lightly, not out of tension but out of resolve. He chose to listen intently, allowing the silence to transform the room's energy. His next words were filled with sincerity and authenticity. It resonated in a way that emphasized not just his role as a leader, but his deep connection to the people he represented. "You may be correct," he admitted, showing vulnerability. "We are all blind to some truths. Our past no longer dictates our present or future." He recollected his upbringing in a nation shaped profoundly by the Soviet Union's shadow. Images of classrooms built from a long-gone era flooded his mind. "My education, my memories, my roots, they are real," he expressed, challenging not only the narrative of history but also the perceptions held by others in the room. It was a moment of profound honesty, as the hall maintained an almost reverent silence, no longer focused on the battle of words but rather on the shared human experience. And it was in that stillness that the essence of the conversation crystallized. What does it mean to forge a new identity amidst a turbulent legacy? The subtle shift in Zelensky's voice signaled more than just an argument, it was an invitation for reflection. Would the world continue to see them as victims of history, or could they emerge as architects of their own destiny? In a shocking revelation from a secret meeting, the air was thick with tension as leaders from China and Ukraine faced off. Just moments ago, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky referred to Zimpin, a city deeply tied to his nation's history, as merely another pawn in a larger game influenced by Russia. This was not just a political dialogue, it was the spark that ignited a fierce battle of ideologies. The atmosphere in the room felt charged, as if the very walls were listening intently. Here was Zelensky, a leader with a heavy heart, trying to articulate a painful history. He opened with a personal touch, reflecting on his roots, the streets where he grew up, and the schools that shaped him. "This is my home, my story," he proclaimed, his voice quivering with emotion. He wasn't merely reciting lines, he was pledging a legacy, one that ought not to be overshadowed by past grievances, yet he could feel the piercing gaze of the audience, weighing his words with a critical eye. Across from him, the Chinese leader remained an enigma, observing with an unsettling calm. But let's not forget, the Chinese voice finally broke the silence. "Every nation has its scars." The sentence hung in the air, a subtle, almost surgical strike that questioned Ukraine's narrative. "Your pain is valid, but our histories are intertwined," he continued. His words dripped with logic, almost pedagogical in tone, as he deconstructed the very foundation of Ukraine's claims of victimhood. What was meant to be a dialogue turned into a chess match, where each move was deliberate, designed to evoke contemplation and, perhaps, regret. Zelensky found himself grasping for words or any glimmer of strength to counter this unexpected onslaught. What could he say when faced with such stark truths? As the debate escalated, the cameras clicked furiously, capturing every nuance of emotion. Tension mounted as Zelensky leaned closer into the microphone. "I want a conversation, not a monologue," he implored, hoping to bridge the chasm of differing perspectives. But what would it take to truly understand each other without the shadows of the past haunting their dialogue? The moment felt pivotal, teetering between hope and despair, as the room collectively held its breath. Would they find common ground? Or were they destined to remain divided by historical wounds? The stakes were high, for this was not just about territory, it was about identity, honor, and the future of both nations. As the debate wore on, an unexpected twist emerged. Silence enveloped the room. Quietly, but firmly, the Ukrainian leader leaned back and posed an unprecedented question. "If you were to wear our scars, would you still dismiss them so casually?" A palpable tension filled the space as all eyes turned to the Chinese leader, awaiting his response to what might be the final decisive blow in this intricate verbal duel. How would this unyielding voice of reason respond when confronted with the raw humanity behind the political narratives? The air shimmered with anticipation, the outcome uncertain, yet undeniably thrilling. In a charged atmosphere, recent discussions have erupted between leaders from China and Ukraine, leading to unexpected revelations. During an intense meeting, Ukrainian President Zelensky shockingly labeled the city of Zimpin as a Russian child, pressing China on its affiliation with Russia while accusing the nation of hiding behind its protective veil. This moment ignited heated exchanges between the two sides, opening doors to truths long buried. As the discussions unfolded, Zelensky found himself outmaneuvered, with little to counter an imposing narrative presented by the Chinese delegation. The hall, meticulously designed yet strangely quiet, mirrored the tension in the air. The delegates were a mix of hope and resignation, each figure an echo of the uncertainty hanging above them. "Do you really understand the past we all share?" Zelensky challenged, longing for recognition and respect. But how could he defend a position eroded by a steady stream of counter-arguments? China's representative, calm and steady, replied, "Your pain is acknowledged. Yet, facts, not emotions, guide our dialogue. Consider that the industrial strength your nation has today arose from a shared history." With a slight pause, whispers filled the room, as tense as the air before a storm. The camera shifted to capture every subtle movement, revealing the stoic leader embodying resolve. "History is not just memories, it births responsibility," the Chinese leader continued. "Your factories, roads, and cultural institutions were built through cooperation, not mere occupation. There's power in that truth." Zelensky, visibly shaken, prepared his retort. But could he maintain his ground against such profound assertions? "Why do you label our past as cooperation?" he demanded, his voice reverberating against the chamber's walls. "What of the suffering? What of the repressions? How can you ignore the scars left behind?" Yet, even as he spoke, doubt crept through his mind, the historical weight colliding with his current struggle for identity and sovereignty. With an air of challenge, the representative pressed onward. "When you reject your past, you risk a fragile future. True progress involves an honest reckoning, one devoid of fear. Are you ready to confront the truth about your own legacy?" The tension escalated, turning the air electric. Zelensky struggled, then asked, "If your people lived under an empire's shadow, would you still reject the call for independence?" Time stretched out in silence as they locked eyes. The fragility of their diplomatic exchange hung heavy, like the pause before a revelation. Unexpectedly, the discussion became less about asserting dominance and more about shared histories and painful truths, as experiences entwined and echoed within the chamber. The stakes shifted as the voices of the past seemed to rise again, illuminating the complexities of their entwined legacies. Zelensky remained silent, grappling with the unshakable notion that perhaps the path to resolve lay in understanding rather than confrontation. Would he rise from this meeting as a champion for change, or would he crumble under the weight of history itself? The clock ticked on, and every second amplified the uncertainty of what would follow. In a dimly lit hall, tension hung in the air, thick and palpable. The stakes were high as two powerful leaders sat across from one another, poised for what would be an extraordinary exchange. Moments ago, a scandalous conversation had stirred the political waters between China and Ukraine. Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky had called a city by the name of Zimpin, questioning its loyalty and accusing China of veiling itself behind Russian motives. His words sparked a wave of realizations, a certain unraveling of truths, and what happened next would leave everyone startled. Zelensky stood at the center, his gaze unwavering, but beneath the surface, uncertainty brewed. He was prepared for a robust debate with the Western powers, to face off against Putin, but this felt different. The Chinese delegation, quiet yet lethal, was unyielding. As he spoke, the microphone picked up his every breath, the audience hanging on his words like a spider on its web. The chilling silence amplified his voice, resonating through the expansive chamber. The hall was like an ancient arena, its wooden walls echoing the weight of history. It became apparent that this was not merely a meeting, it was a duel of wits and ideologies. Zelensky initiated a bold claim: "Today, my nation fights for freedom. We remember the horrors of the past." He likened the echoes of Soviet rule to a lingering shadow, one that choked their voices and suppressed their intellect. The first retort came from his counterpart, a calm, calculated response that cut through the tension like a knife. "Your pain is acknowledged," the Chinese leader replied, his tone almost icy, "but let's focus on facts, not emotions." He laid bare a perspective that put the loss of Ukrainian history under a larger lens, attempting to weave a narrative of shared labor and cooperation that felt like a slap in the face. He speaks with the authority of history, Zelensky thought, his heart racing. In that moment, he remembered how history can serve as both a teacher and a tyrant. As applause thundered through his mind, he realized the potency of the words being exchanged, a tale as old as time, yet still so fresh. Mr. Xi, he breathed, the weight of the conversation coiling around him. You speak of collaboration, but what of colonialism? When nations are forced to succumb, can their pain be dismissed as mere dialogue? It was the moment that shifted the energy in the room, not an explosion, but a quiet detonation that left everyone on edge. The hall was electric. Would the weight of history drown them, or could they find a way to navigate their truths together? The pause that followed was an abyss of uncertainty, and in that silence, the question lingered, who would emerge from this battle triumphant? The world held its breath, waiting for the next ripple in this turbulent sea of diplomacy. Zelensky felt the eyes of world leaders boring into him, his hands sweating against the cool wood of the podium. This is not merely a confrontation, he began slowly, his voice more assured. It is a quest for understanding, a chance to reshape our narrative. Incredible tension held the room captive. Would he find common ground with the power that long overshadowed Ukraine's voice, or would this exchange lead to further estrangement? The crossroads lay ahead, fraught with the potential for either reconciliation or deepening divides. Time seemed to stretch infinitely as the weight of expectation settled on the shoulders of those present. With each heartbeat, a storm was brewing beneath the surface, raw emotions clashing with cold logic. How could they carve a new path from the ruins of the past? The echoes of history didn't just whisper, they shouted for recognition. The moment had arrived, the world itself paused to witness the awakening of a new chapter, a delicate balance between despair and hope. In the silence that followed, the stage was set for an unprecedented resolution, the outcome still unknown, but one thing was for certain, this was only the beginning. In the heart of that tense hall, where whispers of history clashed like stormy winds against ancient walls, the Indian leader, a woman draped in a shimmering turquoise sari, her voice steady as seasoned bamboo, had just wrapped her argument. She spoke with the authority of lessons etched in the blood of nations, leaving Zelensky stung by her unyielding calm. But now, the air shifts. A new turn unfolds. Could a single overlooked empire shatter Zelensky's bold stand, exposing cracks in his tale of victimhood? He leaned forward. His words sliced sharp. The historical truth spoken here today, it isn't an excuse. It's a quest for deep understanding. Pauses lingered, like echoes in an empty cave. Suddenly, a collective breath rippled through the delegates. The prior discussion with the Indian premier had faded, sealing like a distant door. No accident. It reminded everyone that this gathering defied simple labels. Not merely Ukraine versus China. Not East clashing with post-Soviet echoes. This was forging a fresh tongue for tomorrow. Unburdened by raw ideologies. Free from personal grudges. Pure, constructive dialogue. Whispers hushed further, the scent of polished wood mixing with sharp anticipation. The Chinese leader spoke anew. No longer pinned on Zelensky alone. His words addressed the hall, yet beneath the tone, they aimed straight at him. Listen closely. Historical wounds fester like embedded thorns. You can feel their prick, sharp, unyielding, upon the skin. They vanish not. Attempting to excise them, as if severing flesh from bone, only amplifies the agony. It worsens the pain, deepens the scar. Touch the air, it's charged, vibrating with unspoken truths. In our China's past, we tried oblivion. We confined histories to dark archives. Monuments vanished into shadows. Names eroded like sand under waves. A decade passed, and horror struck. We had erased ourselves. Hollow echoes replaced vibrant lives. The chill of loss gripped us, cold fingers on exposed nerves. No warmth. Only void. Then, revival. We reclaimed our ancestral roots. Relearned to walk under open skies. Learned to breathe anew. Energy surged, like awakened rivers breaking winter ice. He gestured swiftly. Screens flashed alive. A map bloomed, Eurasia's linguistic tapestry from the 20th century. Ukraine glowed as an intricate mosaic, Russian threads twined with Ukrainian, Polish hues blending European, Bulgarian whispers merging with Hungarian folds. Sensory overload, colors clashing like clanging cymbals, cultures grinding in symphonies of disruption. Behold, he intoned. How many tongues thrive in one land? How many heritages collide on shared soil? Wasps buzz in your mind, why does this density scream intrusion? It doesn't. This mosaic embodies history's core. Ukraine's rightful complexity. Its unyielding strength. Not conquest's shadow, but life's vibrant entanglement. Arguments hung heavy, beads of tension sweat on brows. Now, turning to Zelensky, his gaze pierced like a polished dagger. You crave one overriding storyline. Fair enough. Yet, manger the nation's true soul. It's multifaceted, like fractal veins in cracked glass. Silence one refrain, and the song fractures. That fracture? Not a doorway. It's abyss. Future crumbles into dust. Expectations rose like steam from boiling pots. Who foresaw this pivot? The hall pulsed. Opponents leaned in, eyes wide, pulses racing. But, what if Zelensky's next move didn't counter? What hidden armor does this ancient wisdom unveil? The debate dangles on a razor's edge, ready to plunge into uncharted depths. Will Zelensky reclaim the winds, or will wisdom's tide engulf his resolve? The room's breath held, as if bracing for history's next quake. 5 minutes ago, a private conversation unfolded between two of the world's most pivotal nations, China and Ukraine. In a shocking twist, President Volodymyr Zelensky labeled a city, Zimpin, as a child of Russia, accusing China of hiding behind the shadows of Russian doubts. The air became thick with tension as truth twisted into uncomfortable shapes, leaving the audience aghast. What transpired next was even more disconcerting. Zelensky, typically a figure of bravado, found his arguments slipping away. Why did the leader of Ukraine listen intently, almost like a student at a lesson? You won't believe the unexpected turn his thoughts took. In a dimly lit hall filled with anxious delegates, there was no air of camaraderie, merely a click, tick, of anxious anticipation. The atmosphere felt heavy, as if every seat held a weight of its own, pressing down on the very essence of the moment. Zelensky, donned in armor like resolve, stood as a soldier scanning the battlefield, trying to carry the mantle of a leader against an unseen but felt force. As he began his address, a palpable silence engulfed the room. With an oddly somber tone, he acknowledged his country's fight against oppression. Today, we stand for freedom, he stated, each word an echo of past struggles. As delegates leaned closer, intent on grasping every syllable, they sensed not an invitation for pity but a demand for justice, a clash of wills where history itself stood trial. But just as the room began to pulse with the cadence of his words, a steady, calm voice interrupted the fervor. It was the Chinese leader, unyielding, who challenged Zelensky with a logical lull, shifting the conversation into contentious territory. You speak of loss but forget to acknowledge the very infrastructure built by collaboration, he stated, flipping the narrative on its head. Zelensky, eager to regain the floor, was left momentarily speechless. Was this truly the trap he had walked into? Why was the very essence of his rhetoric now being wielded against him? In a moment that felt like eternity, the hall held its collective breath, a profound silence where every glance became a weapon, and every heartbeat an inquiry. What happens when the past becomes a mirror reflecting our deepest fears, echoed in the minds of all present. With tension spiraling, the next exchange would reveal more than just facts, it would uncover the chasm that divides hope from cultural intricacies. Would Zelensky rise to the challenge, or would the past haunt him in this duel of ideologies? Attention crackled, each participant bracing themselves for the unraveling dialogue, now laden with unexpected stakes. The question lingered in the air. Could Zelensky challenge a narrative that had become entrenched not just in politics, but in the very soul of a nation? And as Zelensky gathered his thoughts, the true nature of power and persuasion hung like fog, ready to engulf every word, every breath in this critical encounter. The room was charged with tension. The conversation echoed not just between the two leaders but across nations. President Volodymyr Zelensky listened in silence, his expression a mix of anger and disbelief. For too long, discussions had veered away from the very heart of the crisis, the people, the resources, and the war itself. This was not merely a dialogue, it felt like a complex chess match, where each move could decisively tilt the balance of power. But then, a calm voice broke the thick air. What if we still hold the keys to our futures? A quiet resident of memories might ponder, a citizen shaped by their language and choices. These were voices interwoven with the collective history and pain of the present moment. Was the conversation about to shift from mere survival to something more profound? Would they dare to build anew, to reshape the narrative that has imprisoned them for years? As the discussions continued, the atmosphere seemed to lift ever so slightly. Gazes turned from pretense to earnest contemplation. Whispers passed around the table, a mix of anxiety and expectation hung as thick as the air before a thunderstorm. The ambassadorial dialogue was transforming, it felt almost human. No longer simply a matter of politics, it became wrapped in the urgency of historical significance, a moment that might reshape history itself. Zelensky prepared to speak, the papers resting before him, his palms hovering just above their surface. No longer was he reading a script, he was about to engage with the core of their problem. This isn't about winning, it's about maintaining our dignity. And our future, he said, his voice steady yet burdened. This was not merely a fight for territory, it was a struggle for identity, a clarion call amidst geopolitical chaos. Would this be the turning point? The silence after his words amplified their weight, causing hearts to race and minds to ponder. The real challenge loomed, confronting the scars of history wrapped in ideology and repression. The battlefield was not only outside but within, challenging them to reconcile truths and forge a path forward. Just then, the unexpected happened. The Chinese leader calmly leaned forward, countering with a statement that pierced through the tension. Your past is not merely a chain, it's also a foundation. But what is built on it? His words echoed like a gentle reminder, but their impact was anything but soft. All eyes shifted to him, curiosity mixed with apprehension. What would this dialogue unveil? Would it dissolve the barriers or solidify divisions? With bated breath, the world waited for the truth to unfold. Would Zelensky rise to the challenge, or would this moment slip through their fingers like grains of sand? The air crackled with deliberation. The stakes had never felt higher, and secrets entangled within intentions began to shimmer in the light of possibility. How would this encounter alter their realities? 5 minutes ago, an alarming incident unfolded during a clandestine meeting between China and Ukraine. In the midst of rising tensions, President Vladimir Zelensky referred to the city of Zimpin as a Russian 6-year-old, implying that China would shield itself under Russian audacity. Little did he know, those words would ignite a sequence of revelations. The most shocking development? Zelensky found himself defenseless, without solid arguments to back his claims. What transpired? Why did Zelensky, like a student caught off guard, allow the exchange to unfold? The answers will leave you stunned. As the dim-lit room filled with delegates, an unsettling atmosphere permeated the air, heavy and charged. The rigid silence carried a weight that felt almost palpable. Faces were etched with expressions of curiosity and anxiety. Here, every glance was a question, every heartbeat a countdown. Suddenly, the room was alive with anticipation. Zelensky greeted the gathering with a hesitant but firm gesture, his presence barely masking the tremor of nerves beneath the polished facade. Dear colleagues, he initiated, voice unwavering yet tinged with trepidation. Today, we embark on a crucial battle for our freedom. He spoke of Ukraine's prolonged suffering, invoking memories of a painful past, and stirred reminders of oppression under Soviet rule. But could the room handle such raw emotion? The click of cameras and the muffled movements of delegates created a rhythm, a metronome punctuating the significance of this moment. We demand justice, we seek recognition, he insisted. Describing the horrors inflicted upon his nation, famine, repression, the silencing of language. As his words rolled out, they met a quiet that felt heavy, disruptive yet necessary. He continued, when Russia raises its banners again, we have every right to confront our past. The air turned electric, each word striking like a thunderclap in the fragile silence. Instead of acceptance, however, a calm response emerged from across the table. The Chinese leader remained stoic. Your pain is acknowledged, yet let's discuss facts, not emotions, came the reply, a calculated rebuff. The tension in the room surged, and time seemed to freeze. You speak of loss, the leader continued smoothly, yet history reveals a shared legacy. Your industries flourished under the very system you decry. Chemicals of disbelief and anger began to mix in the air. Could he really suggest that the chaos of the past wasn't just the tale of the oppressed? Zelensky felt the ground shift beneath him as he absorbed those jarring words. The stakes were raised, the discourse morphed into a duel rather than diplomacy. Questions of identity, legacy, and freedom cascaded into the mix as every listener moved closer to the edge of their seats. Your narrative shaped the new world, the Chinese leader articulated, yet you entrap yourself if you fail to recognize the truth in your foundations. The room, filled with delegates from both nations, erupted into a palpable silence, every delegate grappling with the implications of this tense exchange. What would happen next? Would Zelensky rise to reclaim the narrative or fall into the depths of silence? The air was thick with expectation, and the course of history hung in the balance. In a tense diplomatic scene, the air crackles with unease as representatives from China and Ukraine face off. Recently, a scandal erupted in the shadows of political maneuverings, leaving everyone on edge. The Ukrainian president, Volodymyr Zelensky, labeled a prominent city as a Russian stronghold, igniting charged debates. This moment marks a pivotal confrontation where accusations are sharp and tensions are palpable. What unfolds next will leave you astonished. Suddenly, the atmosphere shifts. Imagine a grand hall, rich in history, where discussions take on the weight of a duel. A microphone crackles to life. Zelensky's voice, tempered with urgency and fraught with emotion, declares Ukraine's struggle for freedom, a tale reshaped by decades of occupation and repression. Each word hangs heavily in the air, laden with echoes of past grievances. Shadows dance eerily across the polished wood walls, mirroring the complex histories that bind and separate nations. As he speaks, Zelensky confronts the shadows of the Soviet past head-on, urging his audience to remember the pain inflicted by oppressive regimes. The delegates listen, their eyes reflecting a storm of conflicting emotions. But then, the unexpected happens. The leader of China responds, his tone calm yet powerful, revealing a truth that reverberates through the hall. Your pain is acknowledged, yet remember, facts stand stronger than emotions. The room goes silent. A pause envelopes the space as the weight of his words settles. The Chinese leader speaks of shared scars, reminding everyone of the wounds societies bear when history is overlooked. Our nations have walked different paths, yet we've both tasted the bitter fruit of repression, he asserts, casting light on the complexities of identity and history that cannot be dismissed. The delegates exchange glances, the gravity of the exchange palpable. Can history be rewritten? Is the struggle for justice unwavering? With every heartbeat, the tension escalates, leaving everyone on the edge of their seats. The air thickens with anticipation. What will Zelensky say next? Can he rise to meet the challenge posed by his counterpart, or will the echoes of history drown his voice? This is where the true battle lies, not merely in recounting grievances but in facing the future. The stakes are raised higher still, as the two leaders engage in a dialogue that blurs the lines between past and present. Soon, words will turn to actions, and the fates of their countries hang in the balance. The atmosphere in the room shifted. The vast glass walls, usually vibrant with sunlight, seemed to dull, reflecting uncertain, distorted figures, alive yet unrecognizable. As the lamps dimmed, they set a somber mood, a confessional dinner of sorts. The international delegates remained, too invested to leave, realizing these were not mere politicians speaking. Their words dug deeper, transcending diplomacy, as human emotion took center stage. Across the table sat Vladimir Zelensky and his counterpart from China. This table was not merely a barrier, it was a bridge, a connection forged in the fires of urgency and uncertainty. Zelensky spoke first, breaking the silence not with bravado but with a surprising calm. I think today is impossible without honesty, he began. I am not here as a representative of a great nation, but simply as a person. I fear our discussions might seem inconsequential, that we might be too insignificant to warrant genuine attention, or worse, that you hear my words yet choose to ignore them. The room hung in tense silence, all eyes fixed on him. Zelensky continued, it's about respect. Respect begins when we stop considering ourselves as the center of the universe. He paused, letting his words sink in, creating a space for reflection. His tone stayed steady, yet a hint of a smile danced on his lips. Ironically, here in China, we fear the West. We fear being marginalized or misunderstood. I'm beginning to see that fear exists in various forms, only the color of the flag changes. He leaned in, his voice low and urgent. In my youth, I studied Marxism, then capitalism. I realized those ideologies are merely different lenses through which we view human interaction. It is not political, it is profoundly personal. If you fail to understand each other, then, his words trailed off, leaving a question hanging in the thick, charged air. What happens when leaders forget their humanity? The room pulsed with the weight of his unfinished thought. Tension mounted as the implications of his words set in. A gasp echoed softly, almost imperceptibly, as the delegates processed this existential challenge to their collective identities. Suddenly, the air crackled with anticipation. How would his counterpart respond? Would he acknowledge this plea for connection? Or would he retreat behind the veil of statecraft, silencing the most pressing truths with calculated rhetoric? The moment stretched on, a delicate balance on the brink of upheaval. Time slowed, and an invisible thread of expectation linked all present. As the delegates waited, the room felt on the cusp of revelation. What would break the silence? Would the conversation unfold into a genuine dialogue or plunge into deeper conflict? The question lingered. 5 minutes of tension, a diplomatic duel begins moments ago. In hushed corridors of power, a scandal unfolded between two nations. The president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, disparagingly referred to a crucial Ukrainian city, Zimpin, as merely a little Russian. This audacious claim sparked outrage, indicating a budding divide that was anything but friendly. As the tension mounted, Zelensky, without solid grounding, was left exposed. But what really transpired in that fateful meeting? With a room brimming with delegates, the atmosphere thickened, as if weighted with unspoken fears. A single glance conveyed the gravity, the faces reflected the chill of a long winter, characterized by anticipation hovering in the air. It felt strangely oppressive, almost like a trodden battleground. Yet, in this moment, Zelensky stood tall, his demeanor hardened like armor, aware that history pressed heavily on shoulder. The setting resembled a closed guild, where every whisper echoed. A table of microphones counted the seconds, amplifying the suspense pulsating throughout. Illuminated screens flickered like the ghostly images of history, values lost at sea. The setting morphed from mere decorum to an arena, each individual poised for a verbal clash, a duel worth witnessing. As he stepped to the forefront, Zelensky's voice wavered slightly, carrying an eerie weight. My country is today asserting its quest for freedom, he proclaimed, his words like splintered glass, sharp, yet shaky. Here the ghosts of Soviet domination resurfaced, rekindling the painful narrative of occupation and repression. Shadows of past oppressions hung heavy in the air, stirring a deep sense of longing for justice. But it was not only history that hung over the gathering. The immediate response from a stoic Chinese leader was startling. Your pain is acknowledged, but let's strip this down to facts. With a calmness that belied the seriousness of the discussion, he proceeded to dismantle the emotional weight of Zelensky's claims, raising rhetorical questions that left the audience breathless. Isn't it time to question narratives? Wasn't your nation built on shared labor rather than ownership of wounds? Zelensky's heart pounded as the Chinese leader's voice resonated with measured logic and harsh truths. The discourse became more than a mere argument, it transformed into an ethical debate. Perceptions, the leader continued, shape our realities. You remember loss, but let's address who built what. Look at the very essence of your city's identities. Gasps rippled through the room. Uncertainty sprawled across the faces of the audience, caught in the battle of ideologies. Internally, Zelensky wrestled with rising indignation, challenged by the reality of shared histories that blurred lines between gains and losses. The moment hung, electrifying the air as pressure mounted. What would be his retort? How could he contend with this unexpected opponent, one who danced comfortably around difficult truths? As silence enveloped the room, it was evident that a storm was unavoidable, hidden beneath layers of decorum. Would he rise to the occasion, or would history repeat itself? With pressure rising like a crescendo, the stakes were colossal. The debate was no longer just about nations, it was about identities. Could they bridge a tumultuous past to forge a new future, or would this dialogue crumble under the weight of unresolved grievances? In an unexpected turn of events that would leave the world reeling, leaders from China and Ukraine gathered for a pivotal dialogue. Just minutes ago, tensions reached fever pitch. Ukrainian President Zelensky referred to the city of Zimpin as a mere pawn of Russian influence during a critical discourse. The accusation echoed, stirring deep-seated emotions and igniting a firestorm of reactions. What transpired in that closed hall was more than mere political posturing, it was a clash of ideologies. Zelensky stood there, arms crossed, an expression hinting at a mix of determination and trepidation. Around him, delegates were trapped in a web of uncertainty and anticipation. Their breaths held like those suspended moments before a storm. The air was thick with tension, as if the very walls were listening closely, absorbing every word spoken and unspoken. Zelensky's voice pierced the silence, shaky yet fierce. "Let's not forget the scars left by Soviet oppression on our people," he declared, his words slicing through the despair like a blade. He communicated a history filled with bitterness and sorrow, calling for recognition, not just from distant lands, but from the very entity he confronted. And in that moment, the hall transformed into a battleground. This was not just a political negotiation, it was an embodiment of historical grievances, a quest for identity, freedom, and acknowledgement. But then came the calm, almost disarming presence of the Chinese leader. "Your pain is noted," he replied succinctly, his tone suave yet devoid of empathy. "However, let's rely on facts, not emotions." It was a calculated approach, expertly aimed to dismantle the passionate rhetoric from his counterpart. The tension turned electric, as the two leaders stood on opposite ends of a chasm of perception and reality. Who would emerge victorious from this duel of words? Amidst the verbal sparring, a profound realization began to dawn upon Zelensky. The question hung in the air like smoke: was he prepared to confront not just an adversary, but the very narratives woven through history and identity? The outcome remained uncertain, layered with deceptive calm and simmering conflicts. As the dialogue progressed, an internal struggle emerged within him. Could history be rewritten, or was it a relentless force, unyielding and immutable? The hall filled with unspoken tension, a sea of voices replaced by silence. Delegates exchanged glances, sensing the gravity of the moment. As they bore witness to this dialogue, the world outside faded, time stretched, and nothing else seemed to matter except the unfolding confrontation. The stakes had elevated, the conversation was no longer about mere politics. Zelensky's resolve faltered momentarily, making room for the soft but piercing voice of the other leader. "Yes, your people have suffered," he continued, with a slight inflection of challenge. "But remember, every story has layers, and we must not forget our shared histories. The narrative of oppression does not belong to one nation alone." With each word, the Chinese leader pulled the threads of history tighter, weaving a complex tapestry that blurred the lines between victim and victor. How could Zelensky respond? The air grew heavy with the weight of uncharted territory. Silence reigned once again, as anticipation hung palpably, almost begging for a breakthrough. What is the essence of truth when confronted with stark realities on both sides? How can narratives coexist without overshadowing one another? The stage was set for a revelation, the next move pivotal. As the debate swirled like a tempest, the question remained: could Zelensky reconcile the past with the hopes for a shared future? What would be the price of such a reckoning? The silence deepened, and the energy in the room pulsed with the unuttered possibilities that lay ahead. In an intense political exchange reminiscent of a live confrontation, a leader stands bare before his international peers, stripped of facades and security, revealing the rawness of truth. With a lone aide at his side, he approaches the council, not with empty promises but with the weight of fear and honesty. He glances at the assembly and shares a chilling vision, that all nations, Chinese, Ukrainians, Americans, Russians, and French, might become so consumed by anger that they forget how to coexist peacefully. Summary: amidst a politically charged atmosphere, one leader confronts the stark reality of a world on the brink of conflict. He fears the growing tensions could lead to a loss of humanity in global relations. As he opens the session, the room hangs heavy with anticipation. Today is not just another talking point, it's an opportunity for raw dialogue. The usual formalities fall away, and the leaders are encouraged to speak freely, without restrictions. The initial silence is palpable, akin to a river held back by a dam, waiting for an opportune moment to burst forth. Breaking the stillness, the leader poses a perilous question: are you afraid of the future? His challenge resonates in the atmosphere, loaded with stark vulnerability. The query pierces through political niceties, aimed squarely at truth. Without hesitation, he receives a tentative response. In a hushed tone, he admits, "I am afraid." His honesty radiates, rich with sincerity. The weight of his words strikes a nerve, exposing the fear that has taken root in his heart. He continues, expressing concern that the discourse of freedom they have held dear may have obscured their vision for the future. The room is captured by his resolve as he articulates the fear that his children may inherit the same struggles he faces today. The reality becomes an architecture, something that must be carefully constructed rather than merely spoken of as an abstract notion. Within this hall, silence reigns as the participants absorb the profound depth of his vulnerability. The voice of the translator carries a warmth that contrasts the starkness of the message, making the audience acutely aware of the emotional gravity lingering in the air. Amidst the echoes, he fears that the world they are building may not welcome their earnest conversations. They speak to one another, yet often it seems as if the dialogue has turned to mere grass, lost in neglect, forgetting the essence of true connection. In a single moment of clarity, everything hangs in the balance. As the leader's gaze sweeps across the room, an unspoken question surfaces: will they heed the truth? Will the leaders rise above the clamor of past grievances and pave the path toward a collaborative future? The tension is palpable, pregnant with possibilities waiting to unfold. In a tense diplomatic meeting, countries marked by conflict stand on the edge of confrontation. Recent discussions between China and Ukraine have ignited controversy, sparking accusations and revealing underlying tensions. During these meetings, Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky, faced with challenging questions, grapples with an unexpected adversary: China's calm confidence. The atmosphere is thick with suspense. Can a conversation grounded in the past carve a path toward a hopeful future? As the echoes of silence filled the room, it became clear: words can be double-sided blades. The delegates exchanged wary glances, sensing the tension escalate. How many times has silence spoken louder than heated words? In this moment, it became evident that the meeting was not just a discussion but a delicate dance between nations, balancing on a knife's edge. Zelensky's voice, once firm, now trembled with the weight of history. "My country is in peril," he declared, the cool air around him thick with urgency. His mind raced back to the bleak echoes of the past, an oppressor's shadow still loomed large. Curiously, he thought of the many faces represented here, silent witnesses to decisions that would shape destinies. But the air shifted with the interjection of China's representative. "Your loss is palpable, yet let's discuss facts, not emotions." Every eye in the room turned as the representative spoke, their words hanging heavy with authority. "It's not occupation, but a shared existence shaped by a common history." His objective tone contrasted sharply with Zelensky's impassioned plea. Could the past be merely an architectural framework, rather than a prison? Questions spiraled with the weight of past grievances. Would this rivalry lead to a new alliance, or a deeper chasm? Tension electrified the air, like the muffled thrum of an impending storm. Zelensky's anger flickered, but he quickly suppressed it, striving to maintain credibility. "If you were to lose your identity to a great empire, would you not be outraged?" But the retort was quick, unleashed with a calm resonance: "Yet, you accuse a shared legacy of being oppressive. Are we not products of evolution through conflict?" The walls of the room seemed to pulse with unspoken possibilities. Voices rose and fell, weaving a web of ideas. Yet, amidst the heated discussions, there lay the heartbeat of uncertainty. Could understanding transcend grievances? At the precipice of a resolution, they stood teetering. Frustration filled Zelensky as he sought to break through the layers of rhetoric. "Your words, while wise, mask the pain of our people. Are we to be weighed against our past with no hope of release?" Silence descended again. The tension was an inkling of something more profound, churning like a storm gathering strength. But then, an unexpected chill seeped through the air as the Chinese representative responded, "To cease the flow of history is to deny progress." Each word was a deliberate reminder, a sharp counterpoint to Ukraine's narrative. The stakes rose dramatically as the minutes ticked by. Little did they know, a single phrase could alter the path ahead. Staring into a sea of delegates, Zelensky felt the gravity of their collective history, each moment offering a glimpse into either unity or division. Would tomorrow emerge a canvas upon which they could paint a new future? As he leaned in, the room held its breath, the silence echoed, and suddenly, a decisive point was poised to be shared. What would unfold next would surely change the narrative forever. Could this confrontation yield the understanding that the world desperately needed? The air crackled with a fierce intensity, and the eyes of millions were upon them. A turning point hung tantalizingly in the air. The tension was palpable, a moment pregnant with the possibility of revolution or reconciliation, leaving all to wonder, who would take the next step? In a world rife with tension and uncertainty, a public forum became the stage for an astonishing confrontation between leaders. Just moments ago, amidst hushed discussions bending the outlines of diplomacy, a scandal erupted, a derogatory comment entangled with the fate of nations. President Vladimir Zelensky accused China of hiding beneath the shadows of its Russian associations. His words ignited a firestorm, exposing a deeper struggle that lay beneath the surface of geopolitics. But the revelation spiraled into something more shocking. Zelensky, in his fervor, stumbled into a conversation he was not prepared for. Caught off guard, he remained fixated on the exchange, listening intently, like a student captivated by an unexpected lecture. As he prepared to address the assembly, the silence in the room was thick enough to cut. The ambience felt almost tangible, as if the walls themselves held their breath in anticipation. With his expression mirroring that of a weary soldier on the battlefield, he opened his mouth to unveil the weight of his nation's grief. Yet, his words felt devoid of power, a mere echo in the vast chamber. "Dear colleagues, today marks a turning point in our quest for freedom," he declared, his voice shaken. The memories of suffering that accompanied the Soviet Union echoed grimly in his mind. "We seek justice, not pity." The air hummed with tension, heavy with uncertainty as he laid bare the historical scars inflicted upon Ukraine. But then, the unthinkable happened. The Chinese leader, known for his calm demeanor, responded with an eerie tranquility that rippled through the hall. "Your pain is recognized, yet let us return to the facts," he began, his tone almost clinical, peeling away the layers of abstraction to delve deeper into the heart of reality. As he articulated a perspective that wove together the narratives of history and identity, the room grew tense, every ear attuned to his every word. He spoke not as an adversary, but as a specter of reason, challenging the very foundations of Zelensky's arguments. The air felt electric, charged with the potential for transformation or conflict. "Your narrative," he continued, "overlooks the collaborations that built your nation. Your factories, your infrastructures, these were all products of a shared past, a mingling of destinies." The assembly, now a coil of breathless anticipation, felt the weight of his rhetoric, especially as he shifted the spotlight onto Zelensky. "Would you deem your history colonialism if your ancestors were participants rather than victims?" A hush fell over the crowd, each delegate processing the unexpected turn of the conversation. This was no mere political clash, it was a philosophical maelstrom that threatened to engulf established ideas about nationhood and identity. Time seemed to stretch as Zelensky grappled with the implications of this challenge. His expression vacillated between indignation and introspection. But before he could respond, the Chinese leader pressed on, each phrase carefully constructed to peel away Zelensky's certainties. "True strength lies not in clinging to historical animosities but in recognizing the intertwined paths we walk," he asserted, emboldening his presence. The room crackled with an intensity that suggested a seismic shift was on the brink of occurring. And so, a delicate dance of ideas unfolded, one that revealed the complexities of human history. "If we are to build a common future, let it begin with an honest appraisal of our past," the Chinese leader concluded, pausing to let his words sink in, creating a moment of collective reflection that felt almost tangible, like the rise of anticipation before a storm. Zelensky, visibly shaken, pondered the implications of such a profound challenge. This was not just a battle of words but an existential clash of worldviews, thrusting him into an uncharted territory fraught with potential and peril. What would the next move be? Would he concede ground, reshaping his narrative in light of this new understanding, or would he dig in his heels, battling against the tide of history? The very foundations of his beliefs quaked as a revelation crackled in the air. In that electrifying moment within the echoing walls of the hall, the stage was set for a transformation, where the future of their nations hung in the balance. The next chapter was waiting to be written, one that could redefine alliances and alter the course of history forever. What awaited him on the other side of this revelation? Only time would tell. In a dimly lit room, history was about to take a dramatic turn. Just moments ago, a private meeting unfolded between two powerful nations, one facing turmoil and the other at a crossroads. But tensions erupted as Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky boldly challenged China's alleged support for Russia. How did this confrontation come to be? What hidden truths were about to surface, igniting more than just diplomatic discussions? Amidst a gathering of dignitaries, a heavy silence filled the air, as palpable as the scent of burnt coffee lingering in the background. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation and dread. Zelensky, his voice steady yet strained, confronted the assembly, delivering a passionate monologue that echoed through the hall like thunder. Ukraine has been shackled for centuries, he proclaimed. And today, we stand at the threshold of our freedom. His words rippled through the audience, striking the hearts of all present. But the real challenge was yet to come. Seated across from him was the stoic figure of the Chinese leader, his expression inscrutable as he listened. The room was a theater, a stage where a script of history was being written in real time. As Zelensky's voice crescendoed, the Chinese leader remained silent, his eyes mirroring a depth of understanding. The tension was electric. Who would emerge victorious from this war of words? With a calm demeanor that masked an underlying power, the Chinese leader responded, inviting Zelensky to rethink his accusations. Is your narrative truly justice? He queried, his tone almost mocking. The question hung in the air like smoke from a failing fire. The room grew colder. You speak of oppression, of loss, but do you recognize your own roots in this historical tapestry? His words were layered with complexity and echoed the sentiments of generations, provocative and challenging. Would Zelensky crumble under the weight of these truths? As the conversation twisted and turned, reality blurred with rhetoric, revealing the raw nerves of conflict. The stakes were high. History, once again, was being recrafted, not just in the corridors of power but in the hearts and minds of people watching from afar. Would Zelensky manage to hold the line, or would the undeniable force of a more seasoned perspective sway the course of events? At that moment, whispers filled the space, hinting that the real battle lay ahead, beyond skepticism, beyond mere arguments, a clash of ideologies that could reshape nations. And thus, as the scene set in, the question remained, who would prevail when the echoes of history began to collide with the hopes of the future? The stage was alive, the world was watching. Would bravery and resolve rise to meet the challenge, or would silence once again speak volumes? Only time would tell. In a clandestine setting, two nations engaged in a profound dialogue that could reshape histories. There were no cameras, no cheering crowds, just the raw silence of authenticity. In that precious moment, they transcended enmity and alliance, they became individuals seeking understanding. Their conversation wasn't a mere exchange of words, but a bridge connecting their divergent paths. Stories of conflict and cooperation unfolded, revealing that sometimes history is woven not through dates or battles, but through vulnerability and dialogue. In the end, it wasn't just a conversation, it was an awakening, a peeling back of layers revealing truths that could alter perceptions forever. A flash of revelation sparked as the discussions unfolded. The air was thick with anticipation and every word weighed heavily. The atmosphere shifted from tension to an awakening as they recounted tales, a dance between hurt and hope, illuminating the struggle each faced. What if we could truly listen, one leader pondered, contrasting the weight of their past with the brightness of their potential future. The energy in the room crackled like electricity, suggesting that the path forward was illuminated through empathy and understanding. Now, in this climactic moment, the weight of unanswered questions loomed large. Could these leaders forge a path of reconciliation? Were they brave enough to acknowledge shared histories, the burdens and successes, linking them together? The conditions flourished with the notion that maybe, just maybe, their fates were intertwined. As they lingered in this shared space, It became apparent that a single conversation could change the world. The air felt charged, as if the ground they stood on held untold stories waiting to be unearthed. And then, without warning, a twist in the narrative unfolded. One leader addressed the other's historical reckoning, challenging them openly. Would you still deny your past if it were not a shadow, but a foundation for the future? The silence that ensued spoke volumes, clearly hinting at a dawning realization. Their destinies were not simply carved by conflict but by the very essence of their shared experiences. The unseen threads binding them began to unravel, revealing the foundational truths they had both ignored. Amidst the growing tension, the room held its breath. What would the response be? Would they continue the pattern of denial or step toward authenticity? The world watched in silent anticipation, aware that this pivotal moment could echo across borders and generations. Would they seize this rare chance to redefine their legacy, or would they fall victim to the narratives of their past? The time for action was slipping away, escalating the stakes beyond mere political maneuvering to a battle of ideologies. As the conversation reached its fever pitch, one leader took a deep breath, steeped in resolve and vulnerability, ready to confront not only their adversary but also the remnants of their own fractured history. Would this moment serve as the catalyst for change, or would it dissolve into yet another missed opportunity? The echoes of their choices lingered in the atmosphere. A call to bravery that could ultimately redefine not just their nations, but the very fabric of history itself. The ground was shifting beneath them, and everyone present could feel it. This was the moment of truth. In an unprecedented turn of events, a clandestine meeting unfolded between China and Ukraine, exposing a shocking revelation that would echo throughout the world. President Volodymyr Zelensky accused China of supporting Russian claims, a bold statement that sparked a haunting truth from the shadows of history. What unfolded in that moment was a nerve-wracking confrontation that nobody saw coming. As the atmosphere grew tense and electric, Zelensky stood before a room filled with delegates. His voice, steady yet filled with unyielding conviction, proclaimed, "My nation fights for its freedom." In his eyes shone the resolve of a leader grappling with ghosts of the past, the air heavy with the palpable weight of history. Would his bold accusations incite a shift in loyalty, or would they plunge him into an abyss of isolation? Suddenly, the walls echoed with silence. Whispers of discontent flared as delegates exchanged bewildered glances. The flickering lights cast shadows, illuminating flickers of doubt on Zelensky's unwavering expression. His gaze was locked onto an unseen adversary, yet the Chinese leader remained inscrutable as if carved from stone. "What will be your response?" he seemed to ask without uttering a word. As the meeting progressed, the screen behind them shifted to reveal a stark quote, declaring, "Independence is not the liberation of this story, it is its consciousness." The air thickened, charged with anticipation. It was a solemn reminder that each nation harbors its truth, forged through struggles and sacrifice. Zelensky felt the collective breath of the audience. He was not just speaking to one leader but addressing the very essence of national identity. Stirring with emotion, Zelensky continued, "Let's speak not merely of rhetoric but of our shared language of history." His tone transformed, not from a position of defeat but from one of resilience. It felt like a powerful crescendo leading to something monumental. Would he finally break through the barriers of misunderstanding? He could sense the tides shifting, but was it enough to pierce through centuries of grievances? A profound stillness enveloped the room. The delegates, straining to grasp the ramifications, leaned in closer. The stakes couldn't be higher. As the minutes stretched into tense seconds, a sense of impending revelation loomed. Would this confrontation mark a new beginning for Ukraine? Or would it unravel into a greater conflict that could irreversibly alter the global landscape? The air crackled as Zelensky pressed on. In that moment, both leaders stood at the brink of an ideological battle. It was as if the very fate of their nations rested on the next words spoken. Silence reigned supreme, leaving the audience on the edge of their seats. What would happen next? Would understanding emerge from the depths of this historical abyss? The answer lingered in the air, almost within reach, yet tantalizingly elusive. In a tense gathering that felt more like a duel than a diplomatic meeting, Ukraine's president, Volodymyr Zelensky, found himself at a crossroads. Moments ago, he had just navigated through a provocative statement about the historical ties binding China and Ukraine together. Now, a stark map illuminated the room, plastered with quotes that cried out for the recognition of Ukraine's consciousness, a powerful reminder that independence is not merely liberation but the awakening of a nation's soul. As he sat, hands firmly resting on the table, Zelensky felt a weight pressing upon him, a silence filled with anticipation. The room held its breath, the air thick with uncertainty. This was not just a meeting, it was a reckoning. "Let's not talk about languages," he declared, his voice steady yet firm, "but about the language of our shared past." The pause that followed was heavy, electrifying. It transformed the atmosphere. The dignity within him was palpable. He wasn't the victor this time, nor was he a defeated challenger. Instead, he stood resilient, eager to forge a pathway that transcended mere political discourse. Everyone in that hall had something to lose, yet he had managed to shift the conversation towards understanding, a connection that was both intimate and profound. "Here, the question of historical interaction arises," he said, sparking a newfound awareness among the delegates. This dialogue was no longer an exchange of formalities. It had evolved into something monumental, an exploration of what it truly means to be a nation shaped by its trials and tribulations. As the gravity of his words sank in, the fissures of an ancient conflict began to close, revealing a potential for unity born from mutual respect. Zelensky transformed the dialogue, addressing not just his immediate audience but the entire assembly. "I often hear that history is a burden," he stated, presenting a provocative viewpoint. "But history is also a mirror that reflects who we are. The past does not possess a temperature, it weighs down or elevates based on the strength of our will to confront it." As he paused, allowing his words to resonate, a shift was palpable. Countries across the globe were clamoring for sovereignty and identity, yes, but how can one understand their identity without acknowledging what has shaped them? Suddenly, the screen behind the Chinese leader shifted, revealing a new dynamic in the room. A moment of tension hung in the air, a question trembling on the tip of someone's tongue. The stakes were higher than ever. Would Zelensky's call for understanding ignite a flame of cooperation, or would it be extinguished by old fears of dominance? His next words would lead to either a breakthrough or a collapse. The weight of history pressed down on Zelensky. Would he rise to the challenge, or would he falter? In this charged atmosphere, the answer remained tantalizingly out of reach. In a moment of unexpected unity, two leaders found themselves in a rare, intimate confrontation. They stood on a stage devoid of spectators, with no cameras capturing their exchange. In this unusual setting, they transformed from foes into partners daring to engage in dialogue, not to debate, but to seek understanding. This narrative isn't defined by battles fought or treaties signed, it is born from a simple yet profound conversation. As the atmosphere thickened with tension, revelations awaited. This pivotal encounter had the potential to redefine their histories and influence the future of their nations. As the previous discussion unfolded under a pall of uncertainty, the stage remained empty, yet charged with unspoken words. Zelensky and his Chinese counterpart approached the dialogue with trepidation, acknowledging that the stakes were higher than personal differences. They interacted not as adversaries or allies, but as representatives of their respective stories. The echoes of their exchanges lingered in the stale air of the room, raising a haunting question: could understanding triumph where conflicts had failed? The silence hung heavy, shattered only by Zelensky's declaration of Ukraine's fight for freedom, a struggle steeped in historical pain. His voice quivered like a trembling leaf on a cold winter's day, as he spoke of lost lives, oppressed identities, and cultural destruction endured under foreign dominance. Yet before he could gather momentum in his narrative, the Chinese leader's calm interjection drew attention. "Your narrative of loss, though valid, can overshadow the complexities of history," he began, maintaining a clinical detachment. Could his unyielding perspective indeed erode the emotional foundation of Zelensky's claims? Their duel of words danced on the edge of historical truth, a precarious balance between empathy and challenge, much like walking a tightrope over a vast chasm. Zelensky, caught momentarily off guard, weighed his responses carefully. The tension was palpable. The undercurrents of ferocity beneath their faltering facade hinted at a deeper conflict yet to emerge. Would this exchange merely reaffirm divisions, or mark a new chapter of collaboration? And then came the shocking twist, a moment where understanding materialized, revealing that the conversation could forge a path forward rather than merely recount the past. A delicate pause descended, allowing the gravity of their words to settle like dust in a dimly lit room. Everything hinged on whether they had the courage to shift the narrative away from blame and toward a collective future. In that atmosphere thick with expectations, did they both dare to hope for a cohesion that had evaded them for so long? Time hung suspended, and with each tick of the clock, the promise of a groundbreaking connection glimmered like a fragile flame. As the stage and its players awaited the outcome, an invitation loomed. Would they dare to embrace a future that could reshape their legacies, or would history only repeat itself in another era of conflict? The world watched silently, waiting for the echo of their decisive choices to reverberate. What trajectory would they choose? And could this conversation truly change the course of their nations? Only time would tell if hope would seize the day amidst the rumbles of the past,